Hi, this is Janice Trinidad. If you would like to reach me, if you have questions from this video, my email is here on screen, jtrinidad@advancedreasoninganded.com. And the document I'll be discussing in this video is at this short URL, bit.ly/Trinidad PPF. The goal in this video is just to talk about how to design entry events that generate really good lists of knows and need to knows that you can use to build your project calendar around. So if you click down to entry events, you'll see some of my thinking along with links to the actual events that I designed. One of my first things I do to make sure that the materials I prepare will generate really great need to knows is to make a dream list of need to knows that I would love my students to ask, so that way they would ask all the questions that are needed to cover the scope of the project. So I have those listed here. I've also underlined all the keywords I'm going to need to include into my entry documents in order for the students to know to ask those types of questions. So that's really critical. So before I even begin to write my document, I make sure I have an understanding of what are all the key vocabulary I have to include, so that when my students start to ask questions, that list of questions that they'll generate together will be complete. Another thing that I like to do, which you don't necessarily do, but what my students found really helpful, is when I design my entry documents, I try to separate the content itself from the product. Because the content, when the students are learning these materials, there's a danger that if you mix content and project context together, that they're going to think that what you're teaching them only applies to that context. So for example, in my project, we're looking at Pythagorean theorem, slopes and y-intercepts, and we're applying it to a roller coaster. So what I want to avoid is them thinking that that is the main and only application. So the way I separate it is I'll have a project driving question where the context is quite clear, and then I'll have separate driving questions that only have content. So you'll notice in the second set of driving questions could apply to any context. It doesn't have to be roller coasters. And they're just specific to the really big questions I hope that they'll be able to answer by the end of the project. In a similar way, besides dividing up the driving question in this way, when I give them a quick look at a project, we call this a project brief, I'll have a section at the top here, which I've highlighted, that will just be the content learning goals. And then below that, I will have other sections that describe how those concepts will be applied to the context. So I usually have a section that summarizes the purpose of the project and then a summary of what's going to be in their product. So in this quick look, you'll see they have a good view of what's going to be happening in this project, and they also have separated out what they are going to be learning in terms of math or science. When I have that separated that way, it prepares them to generate knows and need to know. So I'm going to walk through those activities. On a launch day, the two activities I do that really help generate really good lists is, first thing we do after we form teams is they will get a handout with the driving questions, and they will start to jot down ideas that relate to the underlying phases. And then after I've given some time to do that, we will discuss it together, and they'll volunteer ideas of what I should write into the bubble. So this will give me my first look at what they're thinking, what these phrases mean. It will enable them to break down the questions so that in one sentence they can kind of see what they're up for this project, and we can start making some big picture connections. So for my context question that connects their role with the content, you can see they thought they're going to be designing roller coasters. They had some sense of the formula for Pythagorean theorem, and they knew it went with right triangles. And then I went ahead and labeled the parts that went with the formula. We drew a picture of what lines look like, and then I wrote the equation that we were going to focus on for that project. And then for distances and slopes, I asked them, what do you think would associate with distance? They guessed correctly, C. And then for the slope, they had an idea of steepness. And then we would break down the other questions in a similar way. After we've had that big picture look of kind of what they're up for the project, they get a handout of the project brief, which is a little more detailed, and they're instructed to underline their no's and highlight their need to knows. So I give them time to do that with their teams. And along with that, in their notebooks, they divide up a page of their notebook into 4 boxes. The top 2 boxes is where they record content specific knows and need to knows. In this case, it's a math class, so they have their math knows and their math need to knows. And they know it goes with the math know and need to know if it goes with this purely math section. That is the main reason why I like that separated out and to the top. So that way I get a really nice list of math knows and need to knows that's separate from the project context itself. And then anything below purpose and product requirements, they can record their knows and need to knows that go with that under project knows and project need to knows. Both of these questions and starting ideas are important for different reasons. And I like to have them separated out because they go with different conversations. The math knows and need to knows typically go with workshops. Their project knows and need to knows usually can be resolved fairly quickly in just like a logistics meeting or just answering their question outright, because those questions are usually quite simple to answer. So once they've had time to jot this down in their notebook, what we'll do is have a whole group conversation to consolidate all of these individual knows and need to knows into one class document. So the way we have accountability for that is I'll put 2 to 4 playing cards in front of each student face down. And then our student facilitator will call on students to volunteer an item that should go in the class list of knows and need to knows. And here's a sample that came out of that. And what we'll do is if they say an item that is unique, they can flip their card and then I'll type it into the class set. Also, if they say something that's unclear, I'll have them elaborate. And the one where I really have them elaborate are their no's in content. So one rule when we're having these discussions is they can't say, I know what the word, we know dilation. Like a math no can't be just a single word. So if a student says, I know what dilation is, then I'll say, give me a phrase that tells me what you know about dilation. And then they'll add when something becomes bigger or smaller, and so on and so forth. The reason why that's important to me is I need to know what misconceptions or developing conceptions are there that I can connect to the material we're about to do. And also this gives me a list of connections I can make in upcoming workshops of things they can already say about the content we're going to cover. And then for the math knows and needs knows, I'm going to unstrike it through. If they say something that doesn't deal directly with the content, I'll just tell them that's not a math need to know, that's a project need to know. And I'll type it down here. Notice the difference in the types of questions. The math knows and need to knows deal more directly with our content objectives. And the project needs to knows are the things they wonder, but don't necessarily deal with content, such as when does it due, what day do we present, and so on. Will we get to paint? Those are all questions that may get in the way of their learning if I don't answer them, but they're not necessarily questions I need to answer in order to teach them the content. The reason why all of these were struck through when we got to this document is as we go through the project, whenever we directly answer one of these knows and need to knows, we cross it out to make sure we go through their complete list. So in recap, like I found value in dividing up the project to making the content quite specific, quite clear and how it connects to the project by separating them. And then being very clear on the standards from your knows and need to knows and making sure the participation is like is shared by all the students so you can get a fairly complete list. Once again, if you would like to follow up more and look more carefully at these documents, if you go to this website, bit.ly/TrinidadPPF, and go to the entry event, you can actually click on the sheets I developed that go with these activities, so you can see the sheet for this project that goes with the driving questions that the kids filled out, and and you can also see the entry events, the entry documents, the project briefs that went with this discussion. Hope that was helpful.